then tissue processing starts from dehydration. So when you talk about tissue processing, it's a process that helps to remove water. You know, at the end of tissue processing, we are trying to keep the tissue in a state, like somehow permanent state, in a state where subsequent processes can be done on it. So if you want to use the tissue for molecular studies, if you want to use the tissue for immunohistochemistry, if you want to use the tissue for any other thing that you want to do, it is better you keep them in a way that it can be preserved. Okay, so tissue processing is aimed to preserve the tissue in a condition where further studies can be done on it, apart from the normal H&E that is done on it. But in order to be able to keep the tissue well, you know, anything that you want to keep well, you make sure that there is no water in it. Any substance or even if in food, if the food contains a lot of water, it will get spoiled somehow, some way. Okay, so that is why in processing of food, usually it is dry food, or they would extract fluid from it so that it won't be so watery, and then attract bacteria and other microorganisms into it. Okay, so one of the principles of tissue processing is to extract water. Okay, you extract water from the tissue so that the tissue will be free of water, and then it can be stabilized. So because when there is water in the tissue, it can also cause distortion, degeneration. It can cause destruction of the tissue. Okay, so you remove water from the tissue. Okay, so when you remove water from the tissue, it has to be put in a medium that is solid enough to support it. So after replacing the water, removing all the water from it, the water is replaced with a medium, a supporting medium. Usually in histology, we use wax, paraffin wax. Okay, so the tissue, after removing the water, is placed in a supporting medium that will keep the tissue stable and rigid, and this can be kept for as long as the tissue is kept. Okay, unless it is exposed to a hot environment, very hot temperatures, or maybe exposed to insects, mice, and all those things where they will eat it up. Okay. Also, the tissue is processed to make it hard enough for easy sectioning. Okay, because at the end of the, excuse me, let me take this call. Hello, Mr. Latte. Oh, I want me. Eko maybe nye. Oh, minisani. Okay. It's okay. So you can get the two of that for them. Two each or three each. It depends on how much it is. Okay. So if you can buy two each, buy two. If it's three each, buy three each. Okay. Sorry, this is let me say, another family issue. Okay, so another one of the reasons for tissue processing is to be able to produce thin sections out of it for microscopic examination. Okay, so when you process the tissue, and then it is very difficult to cut sections with the tissue with water. For example, if you take frozen fish, Okay, if you take frozen fish and you take thawed fish, it is easy to cut frozen fish into smaller pieces than to cut fish that has been thawed. Okay, so in order to be able to cut thin sections, this water has to be either frozen or it has to be taken out. Okay, so along the way we'll talk about frozen sections. Okay, so in this case that we are talking about, it is water that has been removed from the tissue, and this causes some hardness to the tissue, and this hardness enables section of the tissue without damage or distortion to the tissue. So as I mentioned to you, ideally, physicians start from dehydration, but because sometimes the tissue gets to the lab without or with incomplete fixation, so a bit of fixation is done before finally the tissue is dehydrated. So if you want to add dehydration, let's say partial dehydration, but ideally, when you talk about tissue processing, it starts from dehydration. It doesn't start from fixation, okay? Because it is assumed that the fixation will start from the theater where the sample is taken, okay? So by the time the sample gets to us in the pathology lab, it is fully fixed. Okay, so it starts from dehydration. And dehydration by its name means that it is removal of what? Free water, free unbound water from the tissue. Okay, removal of free unbound water from the tissue is fixation. Okay, and then after removing the water, I mentioned to you that the tissue is going to be preserved in a medium. Oh, when I'm busy, I don't like what. Please, hello. Yeah, Madam Vicole. Station. Get them on inside. Please, I have to meet somebody and collect something. Give me like 5 minutes. I beg, please.
Okay, madam.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back. Thank you for giving me the permission to talk to my small issue. Okay, so as I was saying, dehydration, the removal of free unbound water from the tissue. So after you have removed the free unbound water in the tissue, then you clear. So I was trying to explain the reason why you have to go through all these processes. So from the beginning, I mentioned to you that the tissue is going to be placed in a state, in a permanent state, that there is no need for water. Okay. And another interesting aspect of this is that the medium in which the sample is going to be kept permanently is also not miscible with alcohol. Okay, so there is a need for alcohol to be removed. Okay, so as you know already, the tissue is stored in wax. Okay, and wax is not miscible with water. There is no way wax and water will mix. Okay, so because you want to keep the tissue also in a state where it cannot be distorted, it cannot be degenerated, it cannot fragment, or it cannot undergo autolysis or putrefaction, you would want to remove, okay, remove water and make the tissue a little bit hardened enough so that it will not be able to be distorted by the presence of the water. You know what water can do to tissue, okay, even normal fish. So if you want to preserve fish for a long time, you smoke it and you make it dry. So the drier the fish is, the longer it stays. So those who don't dry the fish so much, they leave a bit of water in it. You realize that after some time, the fish start growing molds, there are worms in it and all that. But the very dry ones, you don't find any fish, you don't find any worms in it, and it can be there for a very long time. Okay, so the same thing with the tissue, you remove the water, make it dry so that it can be there for a long time. And because the medium is not miscible with water, with the dehydration agent, okay, so usually dehydration is done with alcohol, okay. So because the embedding medium is not miscible with alcohol, you need to remove the alcohol. And you remove the alcohol with xylene, and that is called what? Clearing. So clearing is removal of dehydrating agent, okay? And also clearing also enables the tissue to be free of unwanted materials like proteins or fats or other things that can contribute to the distraction or distortion of the tissue. Okay, so chlorine also does that. And chlorine also serves as a receptive for the infiltrating medium. I mentioned to you that alcohol is not miscible with xylene. Okay, and therefore you need a medium that is soluble, that xylene is soluble in, be able to mix with it. Okay, so xylene is usually used. There are other forms of embedding medium that we will talk about as we go along. Okay. And then after clearing, after clearing, you have removed a bit of fat, you have removed some proteins, you have created spaces, you have removed, there is no water in it, so there's created some spaces in there. So you need to fill up that space, okay? So that space is filled up with what? Molten paraffin wax, okay? And the process of doing that is called infiltration or impregnation, okay? So you cannot just clear the tissue of alcohol and just introduce solid wax, okay? So the only thing to do that is to first fill in the spaces that have been created as a result of the clearing, and then you fill up those spaces with molten paraffin wax. And then after filling up the spaces, you finally embed the tissue in molten paraffin wax and allow it to solidify. So you allow it to kick up and then become solid. That is where the tissue can be kept for a very long time until there is no space to keep it again. Okay. So those are the stages involved. So let's talk a little bit into details about fixation. So fixation is the process by which the tissue cells or the cells are preserved from distortion. So I mentioned to you that if let's say you have, I will use fish because fish is similar to, or meat, okay? If you have meat and then you don't freeze the meat and you leave it on the bench, what do you think happens to the meat? It will start getting rotten, okay? The meat will start getting rotten. And so you would want, so when you go to the market and you buy meat, you don't just come and leave the meat there. Either you cook it, or you freeze it, or you fry it, or you boil it, or you salt it. Okay, so you add salt to it to make it. What do the salt do? The salt remove water. So anytime there is water, water will distort anything that is tissue, that is meat or anything that is tissue. Okay, that has cells. So far as water destroys them. So when you do fixation helps, even though there is a bit of water in it, fixation helps to preserve the cells, okay? And you know, before you are able to examine a tissue and tell that this tissue has this abnormality, it has to be in a state as if it is living, as if it is in the body, okay? So in order to keep the samples in that state, they have to be preserved, and they are preserved to prevent the destruction of the cells. And that is the use of the fixative, okay? So you use fixative to preserve the cells in their architecture so that the cells will not become distorted. The cells will not rupture, they will not become swollen, but they will be in their normal state, okay? Fixation also helps to stabilize protein, okay? So usually if you don't fix, you know, the body is made up of proteins. So you have enzymes, you have hormones, you have so many other antibodies and other things. So if these, when you take the tissue out of the body, blood flow ceases. And these enzymes and proteins and other things depend on the nutrients in the blood. And so after taking the tissue out of the body, they lose contact. So they are not able to get the nutrients that they need from the blood. And so they tend to feed on the cells. They feed on the cells and they cause what? Digestion. Okay, so there is enzyme digestion that causes the uproar of the tissue. Okay, uproar of the fish, uproar of the meat. Okay, and that is what we call autolysis. Okay, there is another process where you have bacteria. You know, the body, most parts of the body have bacteria as normal flora. Okay, so in the same way, when there is contact, loss of contact between blood flow and the tissue, these also activate the bacteria, and they also tend to what? Feed on the body, and they cause what we call putrefaction. The enzymes cause what we call autolysis, and then the bacteria causes putrefaction. So when you fix the tissue, you inactivate the enzymes, and then you stabilize the proteins, okay? So you stabilize the proteins, you inactivate enzymes, you kill bacteria, okay? You kill bacteria from the tissue, and so the tissue is able to stand for a long time, okay? Or basically forever, okay? And then it is kept in its normal state. So a sample is not taken from the body and then it is hung around. It is, you leave it around for some time before you fix it. Immediately the sample is taken. In order to maintain it the way it is, you have to put it in the fridge. Just like meat or fish. If you buy meat that has been on the bench for a very long time, or with the abattoir or with the butchers for a very long time, you realize that it doesn't taste like getting it fresh and cooking it, okay? Because when you leave it, it will undergo autolysis and putrefaction. It will lose its taste. So the same thing, you fix the tissue to preserve it so that it can be in its natural state, so that when there is an abnormality with it, you'll be able to identify, but it will not be as a result of the enzyme digestion or the protein, the bacteria digestion, okay? And then when you fix the tissue too, it allows for further processing. So as I mentioned to you, the tissue is going to be put in a solid medium that will be there forever. And when there is the tissue is not preserved well, it cannot be kept well. You can even see if you have a fridge that is not working well, if you put, or a freezer that is not working well, if you put your fish inside or your meat inside, what happens to it? It gets spoiled. Okay, so it has to be fixed well. There should be complete fixation so that the characteristics of the process of the tissue will not be distorted. So in that case, usually the tissue is sliced into thin thin sections. Okay, so you have about 2 to 4 millimeters in thickness. You don't cut it so big so that it will allow penetration. It will allow penetration of the tissue, penetration of the fixative into the tissue to enhance complete preservation of the tissue. Okay. So sometimes too, there are some treatments that the tissue goes through after fixation, depends on the kind of fixative that the sample is taken to. So there are different kinds of fixatives that are used during fixation. Okay, so the most common one is the formalin, the 10% formalin that is used. Otherwise, you have canoic fluid, you have Bowen's fluid, you have picric acid, and so many picric oxide, Heller's fluid, Zenker's fluid, so many of them, depending on what you are trying to preserve the tissue for. Okay, so there are some of these fixatives that impact some form of color, especially picric acid fixative. So picric acid is yellow. So when you put the tissue in, it colors it. Usually, if you have very tiny biopsies that are not easily identified in the normal fixative, the formalin fixative, you add picric acid to give it color so that you are able to identify it. And these picric acid form what we call water-soluble picric. And so after fixation, you need to remove this picric, this precipitation. So picric are precipitate of picric acid fluid. Okay, so you need to remove them so that it will not cause false results. Okay, because you find this picric in it, and it will form like artifacts, and it can block the evaluation, microscopic evaluation of the section. So you need to remove them, and you remove them by dipping them in 70% alcohol. Okay, you can put them in 70% alcohol. Another post-fixation treatment is when the sample is fixed, especially cytology. Cytology, it deals with cells, but sometimes the samples come with tissue fragments or clots. And in that case, you want to preserve the structure of the cell, so you fix it in ethanol, okay, or ethanol-based fixative, like canoic fluid. Canoic fluid is a ethanol-based or alcohol-based fixative. Okay, so in that case, you have put the sample in alcohol, and alcohol is a dehydrating solution. So after that, you don't go back and then put the tissue in formalin. So you just drop the tissue absolute ethanol, okay, to complete the dehydration. Okay, very, very important. And other treatments also that can also go to the tissue is when I was talking about small tissue fragments where they cannot be easily identified. So you use picric acid. The same way you can also use eosin. Okay, you can use eosin as a form of coloring. Eosin is pinkish. Okay, so when you add eosin to the fixative, it colors the tissue, and you're able to identify the tissue. Okay, any questions so far? If there is no question, I'll continue. So one of the things that are done after fixation is decalcification. That is, it is done for tissue that are calcified. Okay, so some tissue come and they are bone, like bony tissue comes to decalcify. There are also some tissue that is supposed to be soft tissue. It's not supposed to be bone. It's not supposed to be calcified, but because of a pathology that the tissue was going through, or abnormality that the tissue was going through, the tissue becomes what? Calcified. And so there is the need to decalcify the tissue, remove the calcium to make it soft enough for the chemicals for the subsequent treatment to be able to go through. Okay, so you decalcify it. So how do you decalcify? As I've mentioned to you, decalcify to remove calcium salt from the tissue and make it soft enough for penetration of fluid and also for sectioning. Okay, because you're going to produce thin sections for staining and microscopy, and you can only do that when there is no calcium. Occasionally, you can cut calcium. You can calcify tissue, but or special way that you want to study calcium in the tissue that you don't decalcify. But for any normal microscopy, you will decalcify. Okay. So decalcification is done after you have fixation. So you don't start decalcification just from the site where the tissue is taken out of the body. But only we use decalcification agents as we go along. So usually to determine the type of decalcification agents that you use, it depends on how the density of the calcium in the tissue. Okay, how calcified it is, how hard the calcification is. Okay, that is what will determine the type of chemical or decalcifier that you use for the decalcification. Okay. So sometimes too, apart from normal tissue that is also calcified, sometimes bring it and then it is decalcified. Okay. So how does this calcium calcification occur? So the calcification occur in two main forms. We call it dystrophic calcification. So usually it is called pathologic calcification. So you have pathologic calcification, and there are two forms of the pathologic calcification. So you have dystrophic calcification, where you have normal calcium level, but because of a pathology, calcium is accumulated. Okay. And then you also have metastatic calcification. That is where you have hypercalcemia. You have high levels of calcium in the tissue. Okay. Then it will cause calcification. Otherwise, calcification will not occur. Okay. So depending on the type of calcification that you have or the density of the calcification, you can also do surface decalcification where you process the tissue normally, and then when you're about to section the tissue, then you decalcify the surface. Okay, so you have this surface decalcification and then the whole tissue decalcification. Okay, so as I mentioned, you cut the tissue into small fragments and then you place it in the decalcifying solution. We'll talk into details about that. Okay, so as I mentioned to you earlier, decalcification is to remove what? Calcium, complete removal of calcium to the tissue. And then in as much as you want to remove calcium from the tissue, you also have to make sure that the chemical that you are using to remove the calcium does not cause abnormal cell morphology. It does not distort the structure of the cell. Because if it distorts the structure of the cell, it can be misdiagnosed, because then the cell will look abnormal and then it will be diagnosed as a pathology. Meanwhile, it might not be that kind of pathology that is wrong with the cell, okay, or with the tissue, okay. So the chemical that you are using for decalcification should not affect the structure of the tissue or of the cell. Okay. Another factor is the chemical you are going to use or the decalcification that the tissue is going to go to should not interfere with the staining. Okay, it shouldn't alter the staining. It shouldn't prevent the coloration of the tissue. If it does, then cause 90, you cannot be able to identify the pathology, because the pathology can only be identified when it is stained. Okay, it is stained. So before you perform decalcification, you have to be sure that there is assessment of the tissue, so that you do preliminary assessment of the tissue to see whether the tissue needs a harsh condition or has to be decalcified slowly, or the influences how you are going to go about the decalcification. Okay, and as I've also mentioned that there should be complete fixation. Okay, and then you should also be able to cut it, thin slices, so that the process fluid can enter well. Okay, and then you should have adequate volume of the decalcifier. Okay, the chemical that you are going to use, you shouldn't let the tissue hang in the chemical. Okay, it has to immerse in the chemical completely. Okay, and then with time you have to check it. Okay, so there are several ways of checking whether the tissue is being decalcified or not. Okay, so we call it checking the endpoint of decalcification. So you put the tissue in the decalcifier. Definitely, when you remove the calcium will be in the solution. Okay, so there are some tests that you use to test whether the calcium is being removed from the tissue and whether the calcium has already completely been removed from the tissue. So with time, we change the solution so that it doesn't become saturated with the calcium. If it becomes saturated with the calcium, it will not be able to remove the calcium any longer. Okay. So now let's look at the methods of decalcification. Okay. So I mentioned to you that we have chemical decalcification. Okay, so most often the chemicals are acid. Okay, so you have aqueous nitric acid. You have aqueous nitric acid. Aqueous means that there is water in it. Okay, so you have 5% aqueous nitric acid. Okay, then you can also have nitric acid formaldehyde. So you have formalin as part of the nitric acid. So instead of using water alone, you use formalin as part of the decalcifier, and this will enhance fixation in addition to trying to remove the calcium in the tissue. Okay, why is it important that you add formalin to the calcium or to the nitric acid? It enhances what? Rapid action. Okay, and then it gives good staining reaction, and it can also protect the tissue from destruction, okay, from autolysis and putrefaction, okay, because the formalin helps to preserve the tissue or the cell. So if it's not well fixed, it is able to do that. Another one is formic acid. This is the most common one, because if you use the harsh ones, the very strong acid, it can cause distortion. This one is a weak acid. It takes a long time to decalcify, but it does it slowly by not what? Causing any distortion to the tissue. So the distortion caused in formic acid is very minimal. You may not even notice it. Okay, but sometimes you would want to increase. So usually you use it at 5%, but occasionally you can increase the percentage to about 10%, but ideally it is 5% that is used, because if you increase the concentration, it might cause distortion to the tissue. Another chemical that you can also use is tricloacetic acid. Okay, this one is used for tiny biopsies, very small biopsies that are calcified, like bone marrows. Okay, so you have bone marrow, or maybe you have a true cut biopsies. So true cut biopsies are the biopsies that you take with needles. Okay, that is calcified. So if the tissue comes and is calcified, it is those tiny you use tricloacetic acid, so 5%. Another method of decalcification is ion exchange method. So just like you do electrophoresis, no, we have electrophoresis. So ion exchange means that there is exchange of ion. So usually you use ammonium salt. Okay, so the ammonium salt, the ammonium will be changed with the calcium because they are all what positive. Okay, so it can be changed with the calcium and then remove the calcium and then replace it with the ammonium. Okay, it has disadvantages. Advantage that is very fast. Okay, because it is not like it is leaving the tissue empty. It's just exchange. So removing something completely and not replacing it and trying to find a way of replacing it makes the thing easier. Okay, so it is very fast. It preserves the tissue well because it's not like uh, it is a harsh condition. It's not a harsh, it's not acid. It does not contain acid, so it doesn't really cause the acid, the harshness of the acid on the tissue. So it is good to preserve the tissue structure. Another method is the electrolytic method, which is like the way you do sickle cell electrophoresis. So the same thing. So the solution in the bank in the how do you call it, the tank, the solution in the tank is either formic acid or HCl. Okay, and these have they are anode. So you have anode and cathode. The calcium is cathode, and then the HCl is what anode. There is this movement from one point to the other, and then it leads to the removal of the tissue of the calcium, and it does not cause so much distortion to the calcium. And then you also have chelating agent. The chelating agent is EDT. So EDT, chelate, removes calcium from the tissue. That is why when you want to do it's a clotting profile, you don't put the sample in EDT, because if you put the sample in EDTA, you remove the calcium from it. You know, calcium plays a very important role in clotting. Okay, so you don't put the calcium in EDTA that will chelate the calcium from the tissue. Okay, so EDTA is used to remove, but it is slow. It is very slow, and it preserves the tissue well. As I mentioned to you, any solution that takes time to remove the calcium preserve the integrity of the tissue and the cell well. But the harsh one, like HCl, you use HCl harsh. Okay, so it might cause distortion. So you use EDTA and it will preserve the tissue very well. Okay. So now let's look at some factors that affect decalcification. From what I have said, you can notice that the concentration of the solution, decalcifying solution, can influence whether there will be fast decalcification or not, or there will be distortion of the tissue or not. Okay. I was thinking that because I was late, by now everybody has gone online already, because this people also disrupt and then cause confusion. Okay, so concentration of the decalcifying solution is very, very important. If you increase the concentration, it will make the decalcification fast, but it will cause distortion to the tissue or to the cells. Okay. Another factor that also influences is temperature. Temperature is very, very important. So usually it is advisable to decalcify around 37 degrees, like the temperature of the body. Okay, that will enhance. But if you go below that, then it takes a very, very long time for decalcification. Okay. So another factor is the density of the bone. The density of the bone. So if the tissue is so dense, bone, then it will become harder and it will take a longer time for decalcification. But if the density is low, that is not very hard bone, then it will take less time for it to decalcify. Okay. Another factor is cut it. And comes out. Otherwise, there is no agitation. It means that the ones that will go in are the ones that will stay inside the tissue, and then it will become saturated and the tissue will not be decalcified. But as you agitate it, it creates a current that allows the fluid to enter the tissue, come out of the tissue, fresh one entering, then coming out and entering, and then it enhances complete decalcification. Okay. Please hold on, let me take this call. Hello, Dr. Bode. Okay, sorry for the interruption. Okay, so I mentioned to you that after the decalcification, you will not see with your naked eye on the tissue to tell that, oh, this tissue looks like it has been decalcified. No, you can't do that. You can't see, you cannot look at the tissue and say, oh, the tissue looks decalcified. No, there are ways by which you can check whether there is decalcification or not. Okay, so there are three main ways of checking whether the sample has been decalcified or not. First, you can use x-rays. You know, x-rays take pictures of calcium. So when there is calcium in the tissue, the x-ray becomes white. Okay, the film becomes white, and then it tells you that there is calcium in it. Okay, so you can use x-ray. You can also use chemical testing, and chemical testing is the most common one that is used, where you take the fluid and then you check the presence of calcium in the fluid. So until you find no calcium in the fluid, it is the calcification is not complete. So you take you leave the tissue in the fluid for a day or two. You come and take some of the fluid and then go and check for the presence of calcium. Okay, if it's positive, it means that there is still some calcium in the tissue. So you take it every intermittently to check. So when you check and there is no calcium in the fluid, then it means that calcification is complete. Then you continue with the rest of the processing of the tissue. And then there is another method called the physical method. So the physical method is when you can probe. So you use your hand to press the tissue to see whether you can feel any calcium in it. Or you can use a needle. Okay, you use needle to pierce the tissue to see whether, yes, come in. Come in. Please hold. Okay, so the physical method, as I was talking about, you can use your fingers to test whether there is calcium, but the physical method is the most accurate because your hand cannot go as deep. Okay, and depending on the sensitivity of the person may not feel the calcium in it as somebody else will feel. Okay, And so there is the tendency that you miss some. Okay, so the physical method is the most insensitive method of all the methods. Okay, is the most insensitive method. The X-ray is the best, followed by the chemical method, but the physical, because you can miss it even if you are using your fingers. Some people are sensitive at their fingers, but you cannot, your finger cannot penetrate the tissue to be able to tell whether there is calcium or not. So if it does not feel the calcium, it is out. If you want to use needle, the needle can also bypass some of the foci of calcium in the tissue, and then you will not be able to, even if you are cutting, how much can you cut the tissue if you are using scissors or blade or something to cut the tissue to be sure that the tissue is calcified? You can still miss some of the foci of calcium in the tissue. So this physical method is not the best method. It's not good at all to use for check the endpoints of the calcification. So the chemical method, so X-ray, you just send the sample to the X-ray unit, and then they take X-ray of it, just like they do chest X-ray and all those X-rays. Okay, just like that. And then the calcium method, you use two chemicals. So you use what? Ammonium hydroxide and ammonium oxalate. So you use 5% of each of these, and then you add equal volume. Okay, then you add it to the calcium solution. So when you add it to the solution that is being used to decalcify, and then it crystallizes, then it means that there is calcium in it. If it doesn't crystallize, then there is no calcium in it. So the physical method I've already explained. So now let's look at some points to consider when it comes to decalcification. So, you know, you are going to use chemicals, acid especially, to do the decalcification. And so after decalcification, there is the need to wash completely the chemical that you use for the decalcification from it, because the acid will affect the subsequent staining. You know, it will affect the subsequent processing that is going to be done. It will cause, it will not give out clear staining. Okay, and so it is important that you the decalcifier from the tissue. Okay, it's not good to use that. It affects subsequent staining. Also, you have to make sure that your correct sample size, specimen size is achieved. You don't have to make the smear so thick. You have to make it thin to allow penetration. And then the timing, very important. The timing, the amount of decalcifiers I've mentioned to you, it shouldn't float. It should be immersed completely in the tissue. Okay, and then you should be able to make sure that it is completely decalcified by checking the endpoint of decalcification. Okay, so now we continue with the tissue processing proper. Tissue processing proper. We start with dehydration. Okay, so before you start the tissue processing, all these physicians should have been done. If there is a need for decalcification to be done, it should be done immediately after fixation. When fixation, you cut through the tissue and realize that every part of the tissue, there is no fresh blood in the tissue, there is no fluid flowing in the tissue. When you cut the tissue, there shouldn't be flowing of fluid. At the moment you see fluid flowing, it means that the tissue is not properly decalcified, unless the fluid, the sample is cystic. If the sample is cystic, already contains fluid, so you see fluid in it. But for a normal tissue, after fixation, when you cut, there shouldn't be fluid. It should be hard enough that you will not see fresh fluid coming out of it. It should, if there is any fluid, it should be deficient. Okay. So dehydration. So what is dehydration? As I've mentioned, is the removal of free unbound water in the tissue. Okay. And then also the aqueous part of the fixative, because the fixative is what, 10% formalin. And for 10% means that you have only 10 mils of water of formalin in the solution of 100 mils. So the rest is water, okay, distilled water, okay. So you need to remove the water from it. And how do you do that? You use alcohol, okay. So usually alcohol and water are friendly, so they can easily bounce it and then remove. So they bind by a process called hydrogen bonding, okay. So they remove this alcohol and then they remove this water from it and make the tissue solid enough to prevent distortion of the tissue. So how do you do the dehydration? You do it gradually because you don't want to cause harm to the tissue, especially the cells. Okay, so usually you start from this smaller concentration. So we call it ascending grades of alcohol. Okay, so you start from smaller concentration, 50%, depends on the type of tissue, 70, 80, 95, 100. So it depends on the lab. Sometimes you need changes. So you need 2 changes of 50, 2 changes of 70, 2 changes of 95, or 2 changes of 80, and then several changes of the average to make sure that you don't have any water left in there. Okay. So you can dehydrate for between 24 hours and 48 hours that you have very, very dense tissues. Okay. Very dense tissues that are thick with cells. Okay, but if you have very delicate, like true cut biopsies and bone marrows and all those tissues, you can just because dehydrate over just a few hours and then it will be done. Okay. Sometimes because the had that before you can section. Okay, so you have softness. So like phenol, we have the tissue can become so hard that it can become brittle and start fragmenting, okay, breaking into pieces. And then it can also reduce the also is not good because you are trying to water. And if you still have some water in there, it means that the water is still going to be there and cause distortion to the tissue. Okay. And another aspect of the water is to remove all the water is that the subsequent process that is going to be done is not mixable with water. So if there is water in there, that water cannot be removed. It is only dehydration alcohol that can remove the water. So that water will not be removed, and then it will stay in the tissue and cause more damage to the tissue. Okay, so there are several dehydrating agents, as I mentioned to you. They are basically alcohol. Okay, so you have all the alcohols, depends on what is available to you. Okay, so you can have ethanol, or ethanol acetone, you can have methanol, you can have isopropanol, you can have butanol, you can whatever item alcohol that you get, you can use it as a dehydrating agent. Okay. So I mentioned to you that in order to prevent excessive rate, or you can come in. Excuse me, let me attend to this person. I'll get back. Yes. Hey, but I thought is it because in the inside, you know, they bring. Okay, so as I was saying, so you add this softeners, so glycerol or phenol. So usually you use 4% phenol, okay, or you use equal volumes of glycerol and the alcohol, okay. So usually you add it to the last part, or the last part one. Usually to completely dehydrated, there is water in there. So you have to go back and use fresh absolute alcohol. Okay. So that is one of the things that you use to determine whether there is water in alcohol. So if you go and buy alcohol and you want to know whether it's absolute alcohol, you add what? Anhydrous copper sulfate. And then if it turns blue, it means that there is water in it. It is not absolute. But if it doesn't turn blue, then there is what? No water in it. So now let's go to clearing. So as you dehydrate, you dehydrate with what? Alcohol. So you need to remove alcohol, as I mentioned to you earlier. And alcohol is not miscible with the medium by which you are going to permanently store the tissue. So you have to remove the alcohol, and you remove the alcohol by a process called clearing. Okay. So clearing serves as an intermediary between dehydration and infiltration, okay, and it's miscible with both solutions. It's miscible with the alcohol, and it is also miscible with the molten paraffin wax, okay, and it also makes the tissue a bit translucent. So I told you that from the beginning, when I was explaining, I was giving a gist about the overview about the clearing. I mentioned to you, clearing also removes certain proteins and other chemicals that makes the tissue dense, that you will not be able to see it well. So when you use the clearing, it also makes the tissue a bit transparent or a bit translucent, so that it can be seen through. Okay, it can be seen through. Another point that you should consider about clearing is the boiling point of the clearing agent. That influences how fast the clearing can occur. So if it has low boiling point, then it can easily be replaced. Okay, but if it has high boiling point, it means that you need heat to facilitate the replacement. Okay. So another factor that also influences the clearing is the viscosity of the clearing agent. Because if it's viscous, means that it is thicker. Okay, it's not like water. If it's like water, it can easily penetrate and remove the calcium and melt off the fat and excess material that are not needed. Okay, but if it is viscous, it impedes penetration. Okay, impedes penetration. So it is very important that it is like water. It is not viscous. It is free like water. Okay, so it shouldn't be like oil. It shouldn't be like oil. You know, the oil we have, some of them are slightly watery, because there are some oils too that are very thick and all that. So usually when I'm going to buy oil, you want the ones that are more watery, because that is more better the cholesterol level is not as high as the ones that are a bit thicker. Okay. And then another aspect is that clearing overexposure to the clearing agent can also cause hardness of the tissue. And so in as much as you are trying to remove the dehydrating agent, you don't keep the sample in the clearing agent for a very long time. Otherwise, it will cause the tissue to become brittle, okay, and fragment. Okay. So examples of clearing agent, the most common ones that are being used is the xylene. Okay. Some also use toluene, chloroform, and other xylene substitutes. Some also use oil as a clearing agent, but all depends on what you are going to use the tissue for. If you are going to embed in paraffin wax, then you need xylene. Okay, if you are going to do aqueous embed or frozen sections, then you need chloroform to do that. But if it is paraffin, then you need toluene or xylene derivatives. Okay. So let's look at some of the things or some of the lookouts for choosing a clearing agent. Okay, so what do you consider when you want to choose a clearing agent? So the clearing agent penetrate the tissue rapidly. Okay, it has to be able to penetrate, to go inside the tissue to remove any material, proteins, and amorphous debris that will prevent the transparency or prevent the clearing of the tissue, that will prevent easy microscopy, because you want the tissue to be transparent enough to be able to see through, okay, be able to see through. So you need a reagent that can be able to do that, okay. And then you also, it also has you have capacity to remove the alcohol that was used for the dehydration. And it should also be mixable with the embedding media. It should be able to mix with the embedding media, and then it should not cause so much damage to the tissue. It shouldn't be catching fire frequently, low flammability, okay? And then it shouldn't be so much toxic, okay? But unfortunately, the xylene that you are using is very flammable. It is flammable, but it has to be away from fire. So whenever there is xylene, you don't have to send fire there. It's because of the properties of the xylene. It's very good as an clearing agent compared to the others, okay? And so you would want to abstain from or move away from fire as much as possible, so that you don't cause fire outbreaks in the lab, okay? And then it should cost less. Compared xylene to the others, the xylene is less cheaper, okay? Okay, so the next step of tissue processing is infiltration. Okay, so tissue processing is the last stage for infiltration. Sorry, infiltration is the last stage of tissue processing, because after infiltration, the tissue is going to be embedded in a solid medium. Okay, so infiltration, tissue processing starts from dehydration, clearing, and infiltration. Okay, then after infiltration, there is embedding, and then there is section, and then there is staining. So infiltration, so as I said, infiltration or impregnation, it means the same, okay? So I mentioned to you that when you, after clearing, there is spaces that are created, okay? Air is removed from the tissue, and some unwanted materials are dissolved, like fat and other materials that are not supposed to be in the tissue are dissolved. So after all that, there are air spaces that are created in the tissue, and these air spaces need to be refilled, okay? Because you want the tissue to be in a solid state. That is the whole thing behind tissue processing. It's going to be in a solid state. It's going to be firm enough to allow what? Sectioning, thin section. So if you have spaces inside, it will be very difficult to cut. Okay? Just like you have bread. If you have bread that has risen so much, and you have balloons inside the bread, or you have holes inside the bread, it is very difficult to cut smooth slices of the bread. But if the bread is solid, there is somebody will say there is meat in the bread. When you cut the bread, cut smooth and the slices are smooth. Okay, but when they are the bread is allowed to rise so much and there is air spaces in the bread, when you put the knife on it, it just falls, it drops like that, and then it doesn't cut the whole surface, and then it doesn't look nice. Okay, so that is the purpose of processing the tissue. Okay, so when you infiltrate and then you get rid of foreign materials that are dissolvable in the xylem, you get them all out of the tissue, then it creates spaces in the tissue, and these spaces needs to be filled. Okay, so you fill them with what? Molten paraffin wax. Okay, you fill them with molten paraffin wax, and this will go and fill up the space, saturate the space, and provide a supporting medium for the tissue. Okay, so usually the medium that is going to be used to embed, to solidify the tissue completely, that is what is used to infiltrate the tissue, to impregnate the tissue, because then it will give a good receptive for the embedding medium. Okay, so you immerse the tissue in 2 or more changes of the molten paraffin, and then it will become infiltrated. And the factors that affect tissue processing, okay, so you have temperature, you have agitation, vacuum, we have viscosity, and all those things also influences penetration, because if you don't allow the wax to melt completely before you introduce it as an infiltrating medium, you will not be able to penetrate and fill up. Okay, so this also depends on the melting point of the wax. Very, very important. Okay, to enhance complete infiltration. Then you have some vacuum to allow the penetration and agitation, also to create the current that will allow free flow of the molten paraffin wax in the tissue. So usually, because you want to keep the paraffin wax in its molten state, there is temperature attached to this. That place has a hot temperature, depends on the temperature of the melting point of the wax. So usually the temperature of the bath for the molten paraffin wax for the infiltration is about 3 degrees higher than the normal melting point, so that it will still keep the wax in its molten state, like in its fluid state. Okay. So I've mentioned that already. So sometimes you add some materials to the paraffin wax, because sometimes the tissue is so hard that the paraffin wax cannot hold it very well. Okay, or sometimes the paraffin wax too is so hard that it cannot hold the tissue very well. So depending on whether the paraffin wax is soft, so usually when the paraffin wax is soft, you want to add hardness, something that can help harden the tissue. Okay, harden the wax so that it can hold the tissue. So you add plasticizers or you add resins. Okay, and then if the paraffin wax is also too hard, you can also add what? Some rubber, some diethylene glycol to make it a bit soft. Okay, make it a bit soft. So you either add plasticizers or resins to make it hard, or you add beeswax, you add rubber sericin, and then this glycols to make it a bit soft. Okay. So as I've mentioned to you, characteristics of infiltrating medium. So you should be able to mix with the clearing agent. Okay, you should be able to provide good sections. Okay, ribbons. So ribbons are continuous in serial sections. So if you cut the section, you should be able to have serial sections. So you select the can to dissolve or well. Okay, so you should be able to do that. And the medium itself should be able to be seen through, not very seen through, but it should be clear. It should be clear enough so that if there is anything that is not supposed to be in there, you'll be able to identify. Okay. Please let me attend to this student and I will excuse. Okay, so another factor about the infiltrating medium should be stable. It shouldn't be that today it is transparent, tomorrow it is opaque. That today it is colorless, tomorrow it is green, it is black, it is white. No, it should maintain the same transparency. It should be clear, see through. Okay, you should be able to see through the embedding media. Okay, not see through like glass. Okay, but at least it should be able to, so that if there is something that is not supposed to be there, you are able to see. Okay, and then it should be homogeneous. It should be smooth. It shouldn't have a hard part, and if it is hard, it should be complete hard. If it is soft, it should be complete soft. It shouldn't have hardness and softness. It also affects the section. Okay, and then it should be able to flatten. Is it not? Of the stages in tissue processing. So one of the ways to ensure good tissue processing is the type of tissue that you are handling. So if you are handling a tissue that is not very dense, the timing should be different. If the tissue is dense, it has a lot of meat, as I was saying, then the timing, usually if it has a lot of meat, then you increase the time. But if it is very fragile tissue, like a brain or like a kind of thing, like a bone marrow, like fragments, tissue fragments, like core biopsies or cone biopsies, those ones you have reduced time. Okay, so depending on the type of tissue, the density of the tissue, how thick the tissue is, then it influences the time of the process. Okay. So as I mentioned, you have dehydration. Okay, so you can dehydrate in what 70%, 90%, and then absolute alcohol. So as I mentioned, it depends on the lab. Some will do 2 changes of the 70, some will go to 80 and do 2 changes, some will go to 90 and do 2 changes, some will go to 95. So all depends on the state of the economy of the lab. Okay, so usually for us here in Ghana, we have 71, 81, 91, and then absolute. Absolute, we have about 2, so that we enhance complete dehydration. Okay, and then xylem. So usually xylem too, you have to have changes so that it can be able to remove all the alcohol from it. So in some cases, in some If you go to some outside the country, especially in Europe, they have equal volumes of xylene and then equal volumes of alcohol first before you go to complete xylene, so that the exchange or between the alcohol and the xylene will be okay, because the xylene is mixable with the alcohol. So they put the two together, equal volume, before they go finally into the xylene. Okay, but most often, because it is very miscible, you can also go straight to xylene. Okay, just like it is here. Then after that, you introduce the molten paraffin wax, okay, for the infiltration. So you increase, so you put in the molten paraffin wax. You can have 2 or more changes, okay, so that the paraffin wax can really enter the tissue to infiltrate, to fill in the spaces that has been created. Any questions, or you want me to finish before? So we still have some time to go. So now, tissue processing can be done manually. So the one I showed to you is manual, okay? It can be done manually or it can be done automatically. So usually automatic processing is done when there is what? High workload or increased workload. It is not where you have 1 or 2 samples in a day or in a week. Like a whole month, you have like 20 samples. You don't need automatic processor. You just need to do manual processing, because automatic processor is used for to sample to it is very expensive to get the processor, and you will not use the processor for 20 samples. Okay, so usually it is used when the workload is high. Okay, and then also when you don't have a lot of staff that can monitor when you are doing the manual processing. So if, let's say, you have only 1 person in the lab or 2 people in the lab, somebody is controlling this, somebody, then you set the automatic processor, because the automatic processor is set per the time that you want the processing to be done. So you regulate it in such a way that the timings will be done, and then it will run by itself unless there is power cut. If there is power cut, then it will stay in the solution where it is until the power comes back, and it will be there. So you have to come and reset. But if power flow is continuous, you don't have a problem. Okay, you don't have a problem. It just flows, and then another interesting aspect of automatic processing is that you can set delay time. So let's say today is Friday, for example, and then you have tissue that you want to process, and you want the tissue to be ready for embedding by Monday. Okay, so you can set the time, you can delay the time to start on Sunday. Okay, so you delay the time to start on Sunday depending on your schedule. So if you have 18-hour schedule or 20-hour schedule or 16-hour schedule, you schedule it and let it delay, so that you'll be able to it will process well by the time you get the morning. Okay, so as I was saying, automatic processor is good, but it is good when you have increased workload or you have demand for faster turnaround time, because this one does the processing faster compared to the manual method. Okay, and then shortage in the workforce, as I've mentioned already. If you don't have a lot of staff, people there to be able to control the various stages of the processing, then it is better you go in for the process. But it's usually automatic processing usually will depend on the workload. If you have 20 cases, as I mentioned, in a month, you don't need automatic processing. But if you have like hundreds of cases, like in a week or in a day, you receive like 50 or 50 cases, 100 cases, then you can go for automatic processor. But if you feel like 10 cases or 5, you don't need automatic. Waste of money. Okay. So the tissue processor works in 2 ways: by either the tissue moving and then allowing fluid in. Okay, so we have the fluid exchange method, where the tissue is at standstill, and then the tissue goes in and the fluid goes in and out, okay? Or you have the carousel method, where and then the tissue the fluid at one place and the tissue moves round. You can do both day and night. So tissue processing, you can process several rounds during the day, especially if you have tiny biopsies. Okay, it also allows you to process different processing times. Okay, so you can have and those. Okay, so as I've mentioned, you have two main of fluid transfer. So the tissue transfer, the tissue place and the fluid moves in and out. Okay, so you have the carousel type and then what a self-contained fluid exchange type. The carousel type is the common ones that you see in the pathology labs, the one that goes round, the round one. Okay, so the tissue goes round. Okay, so we have about 12 containers, each of them containing different solutions per the processing protocol. So the first one will be 70% alcohol dehydration, so 70, 80, 90, 100 absolute, and then you have the clearing agents, then you have what the embedding, the infiltrating agent also moving in. So this is an example. So it has progressed. The carousel type has progressed. Now we have the digital one. We used to have the clock disk. So this is the clock disk. So usually the machine comes with a disk, and then you will make indentations on the disk. So you make indentations. So if it's like 36 degrees. So every time it's 24 hours. Okay. So it's 24 hours per day. So if you want to set a delay, it means that you will not make the indentation at the beginning of 24, but you make the indentation for the number of hours you want the tissue to start. Okay, so you make, if it's in the 70%, you're going to spend 30 minutes or 1 hour, then you make indentation at the time you want it to start. Okay, and then after 1 hour, you make another indentation so that it will stop there. Okay, then it has to rise. So it will rise from there and go to the next one. So the numbers you make indentations in the clock or in the disk, and then the number of minutes or hours you want to spend in there. Okay. So now we have the digital one where it is like computer. So you press, so you set programs. Okay. So this one, the clock disk one, if you have different protocols, so you have protocol for tiny biopsies, protocol for biopsies, protocol for very dense biopsies. You will have 3 of these disks, okay, to do that. So when you are processing tiny biopsies, you put the disk for tiny biopsies. If you have dense tissue, you put the disk for dense tissue inside. But in the case of the digital, you have programs. So you can have program 1 for loose biopsies, program 2 for tiny biopsies, program 3 for dense biopsies. Okay, so you just go to the program. So when you set the program, you go, so they have containers. So you go to every container is labeled 1, 2, 3 up to the 12th container. So container 1 is, let's say if it is 70% that is there, container 1, 70%, how many minutes should it stay? 10 minutes, 20 minutes, you set it, it is there. Container 2, container 3, up to the 12th container, which is the embedding, the infiltrating medium. And so that one will be for program 1. So then you also do another program for program 2. So if you have a tissue you want to process and it is tiny, and the timing for the tiny biopsy is in program 1, you just go and click program 1 and enter, and then it will run. So until there is power cut, your thing runs, and by the time you come the following, so you can set delay, that you can set the delay timing that, oh, it should start on Sunday by 10 p.m. and then it will start on Sunday 10 p.m. it will start the processing. Okay, if you want it to be processed by Sunday, you can say, okay, Saturday 4 a.m. or Saturday this time. You set the time and then it will do by itself, unless there is power flash. If there is no power fluctuation, it's the same. It doesn't. Okay. The same thing you can also use. That is the advantage of the digital over the disk. Okay. So I've explained this already. And one interesting aspect of this automatic processor is the ability to create vacuum. Okay, so vacuum also enhances penetration. Okay, so these automatic stoners have vacuum. There is no way you can create vacuum in a manual processing, because you lift the lid and then transfer it. Okay, and there is no vacuum. There is no way you cannot seal it, and then there is no way you can create vacuum in manual processing. But vacuum is very important when it comes to penetration, fluid penetration. Okay, so it makes the automatic stainer very beneficial. Okay, aside the workload and then the turnaround time, it also enhances penetration. So tissue processing is very effective. Okay, so this is the fluid exchange one. So this is the one that the fluid, the tissue stays at one place and the fluid goes to replace. So the containers down here contains the chemicals that are used. So that one too is digitalized. So you set which one should go first. So all of them have labels. So they have numbers there. So you set, this is alcohol, this is xylene, this is molten wax, this is it. And usually, as I mentioned to you, the molten wax, because it has to be in the fluid state, it is always hot. Okay, I mentioned to you that it is about 3 to 5 degrees above the melting point of the molten wax. Okay, just to keep it in a fluid state. Okay, so you put the tissue in this container up here, a space up here, and then the fluid will just move in. So there's a tube that will cause the movement of the fluid inside. So this one will go, then after staying for the number of hours, what you have set on the monitor here, then it will come back and the second one will go up. That is fluid exchange. Okay. This is another type of the fluid exchange. There are several of them. Okay. So as I've mentioned, the advantages of the automatic over the manual one. Okay, it creates for vacuum. Automatic is created, able to process at your convenience. Okay, at your convenience, and give pretty good turnaround time. Okay, so these are all tissue processes. So they are modified ones, old ones. So fortunately, we have gotten one of these. It was a donation. So we have one of these in our lab. We are not using it now because the donation, they didn't have cables. They didn't have cables attached to it. So now we are looking, we have asked the biomedical engineer to get this thing for us, cables that we can use. And then we also don't know whether it is working or not. So we have asked the biomedical engineer to come and test see whether it's working. It's the same type that we see here in our lab in home. So all these are different types of tissue processes. Okay, this one difference also includes self-contained, all self-contained. And this one also reduces spillage. Okay, because it's a tube. The tube is attached to all these ones. Then they blow through the tube, so it doesn't cause spillage. Not like the carousel type. Not like this type that the tissue will rise and then drain and move. So as if there is still some fluid in there, it will be dripping until it gets into the container. Okay, so it causes spillages. Okay, but this one, there is no spillage because it's a tube that is taking it in. So there is no fume generation. Everything is inside. So no, it doesn't create fume. Not like the carousel type, when it is lifted, whatever fumes that is, the aerosols and other things will be created, but this one doesn't create those ones. So now let's look at factors that affect tissue processing. As I've already mentioned, you have agitation. Okay, so agitation creates a current that allows fluid exchange. Okay, allows fluid in and out. And this agitation can be done rotatively, so you can go round. Agitation happens in the tissue. Okay, where the tissue is. So if it's the carousel one, is the tissue, the cassette basket that contains the tissue that moves around. Okay, but the other one, if it is the self-contained one, is the fluid that moves. Okay, the fluid in the fluid. Excuse me, let me pick this call and I'll get back to you. Hello, Jude. Hello, Jude. And to make a attend on Francoja receptionist now. I left there before. Okay, yeah. And then you left the receipt and then the other things, the papers. Yes. There is one full one there. Yes. So I've put it on the plastic table where you have your document, the other document. Oh, okay, great. To the guest house, okay. All right. And today you have closed early. Oh, okay. All right. Great. Okay. So see you tomorrow. Hey, no, you'll not be there. So see you on Monday. Okay. Okay, great. So when there is agitation, there is increased penetration, and it can reduce the processing time by about 30%. Okay. So if you do the manual processing, there is no automatic agitation. So you will have to go there and take in the basket yourself. Excuse me. Hello. Yes, you said this Sunday you'll be around. Okay, all right. Okay. Oh, yeah, you said you are not going to be there. So then I have to pick him up. Okay. Sorry, it's all about the cytology training that is going. Sorry. Right. So, and then heat. Okay. Heat is very important. So as I mentioned to you, you don't have to, even though you need heat to allow the penetration of the fluid into the tissue, but it shouldn't be so hot. Okay. If it is too hot, it will burn the tissue. So about 37 to 45 degrees, it's okay to preserve the tissue. Otherwise, if the tissue, you expose it to too much heat, it will burn and to distort the protein. So if you want to do special techniques on it, like immunohistochemistry, you'll not be able to do it. And it can also affect the DNA. And if you want to do molecular testing and other things, it will distort it. So you have to be sure that there's not so much heat that will cause distortion to the tissue. Viscosity, just like in the when we're talking about the clearing agent, okay, it shouldn't be too thick. Fluid, it has to flow, okay, it has to flow. If it doesn't flow, then it will not enhance penetration, okay, especially when it comes to the molten paraffin wax. It has to be fluid so that it can be able to penetrate and fill up the tissue. Great. So the original one is inside. Thank you. Okay, so now we go to vacuum. So I mentioned to you that vacuum is creating negative pressure in the container. So creating pressure, and pressure allows what? Penetration. Okay, it allows penetration. So pressure is needed, and automatic processes have pressure, automatic vacuum created. But manual processing, no, there is no way that you can create pressure. Okay, so usually automatic pressure, they have a standard pressure that is 50.79 pKa. Okay, so now let's look at some important considerations you look out for when you are processing. Okay, so one thing you will look out for is to make sure that your sample containers, so the tissue containers, the tissue cassette containers, so the basket and the metal cases for the where you keep your cassette, so you keep your samples, your tissue. So cassettes are the plastic meshy containers that you cut the tissue and place them in. Okay, so the metal or the basket that contains them, the containers that contains them should be clean all the time, free of wax. Okay, especially with the carousel type where it has to be lifted. Sometimes it can be caked with especially if it's not at the melting point area. It can the molten wax area. It can be caked and it can prevent movement of the basket. So you have to make sure that you clean it all the time. Okay. And then you also have to be sure that when you're packing the cassette that contains the tissue that you're going to process, it shouldn't be packed too tightly. Okay, you have to create space so that the fluid can move through. Okay, so that the fluid can move through and it will not impede the exchange of the fluid. Okay, and also you should avoid spillage. Okay, because if you spill like xylene, if you spill xylenes around, there is a tendency to catch up with fire if there is naked fire around. Okay, so you avoid spillage. Okay, avoid spillage and avoid accumulation of paraffin wax, especially on the floor. If you have a molten wax spilling on the floor, you know molten wax like a candle, it is slippery, so you can cause accidents and other things. So you have to do that. Okay, and then you have to be checking the fluid levels. Okay, the tissue to be able to be immersed completely in the tissue, in the fluid, okay, in the chemical that is used for the processing. You should cover you should seal it. There should be even excess fluid on it, okay? So when the fluid level is going down, you have to be changing or topping it up. So you top it up. When the color of the fluid is changing, you have to exchange the fluid completely. And then when the volume decreases, but the color is not changing, then you top it up, okay, to be sure that the tissues are properly done, okay. And then if you want to delay the processing, it is very important that you check and then make sure that the schedule is set for delay. Otherwise, your sample will be processed. You set it on Friday, you didn't set delay. It will be processed, it will be there on Saturday, and then it ends in the infiltration. Okay, so infiltration, as I've mentioned to you, it is hot, it is temperature, high temperature. So the sample will be there, it will be drying, and by the time you get there, the sample is brittle. And at the end of the day, nothing can be done with the sample. So if you are setting delayed timing, you have to be very careful. Okay. And then another thing that has to be considered so far as processing is concerned is keeping a logbook for all the reagents. So if you change a reagent today, you note it. Okay, you note it that, oh, today I changed the reagent. And then if you also note the number of samples you are running so that you'll be able to check that, oh, if I run, let's say 1,000 tissues, then the color or the potency of the chemical changes. So then after every 1,000 cases, then I change the sample, or after every 100 cases, then I change the chemical. Okay. And then you should also log in the processing times. Okay, the time that you process. So somebody comes to take the logbook and know that, oh, okay, as soon as he is processing a sample, the person processes it from this and it's supposed to end at this time. Okay, so that when the person comes and the sample is not at the right place, the person will be able to check and see, oh, was there power fluctuating during the process? Because of that, there has been a problem, or put on the line, or maybe the processing is ready and the person has to take it out of the molten paraffin. Okay, and as I mentioned to you, the temperature for the molten paraffin one should be set 3 to 5 degrees above the melting point of the paraffin. Okay, so I think we will end here. We will end here, and then if anybody has any questions, you can bring it up. And if you don't understand anything, you need clarification or anything, please let me know. So any questions, any clarifications, any contribution, or you are going to read something from somewhere and you want to share with us, or you want explanation or something. If I know, I'll tell you. If I don't know, we'll go and find out. And then we'll learn, because we are all learning. Okay, great. Yeah,
Madam.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the tutorial. The place under the dehydration.
Okay.
The addition of the additives
To
the dehydrating agents.
Yes.
There's a place which I did not get well, where you said you add the anhydrous
copper sulfate.
Yes, to the absolute alcohol.
Yes.
And you were saying that if you think, how will you know that tissue has been truly dehydrated? You were saying something about the color will change if you can
blue. Yeah, so you are dehydrating and you want to make sure that there is complete dehydration. There is no water in the tissue. Please, can you mute? Thank you. So you are removing water, free unbound water from the tissue. Okay, the bound water will have something to bind to, so that one will not. But free water. Okay, so for you to be sure that the water that you are trying to remove, the free unbound water, and then the water from the fixative has been removed completely, is to check the water content of the last absolute alcohol. Okay, so if there is in the last absolute alcohol, there is water in the last absolute alcohol, then there is a tendency that there will still be water in the tissue. Okay, and the only way you can be able to tell whether there is, because you can't take the alcohol and taste and see whether there is water in it. You may not even know whether there is water in it, because alcohol and water are very friendly, they are very miscible, so you may not even know. Okay, but the only way you can be able to tell that there is water in the alcohol is the presence of what? Putting in the anhydrous copper sulfate. And if there is water in it, the anhydrous copper sulfate will absorb the water. It will absorb the water in the alcohol and turn to blue. Okay, and I said this is ideal for the last alcohol, because from the last alcohol, it is assumed that there is complete dehydration, and then now you can move to the xylene. The reason why we want complete dehydration is that the xylene is not miscible with water. And it is usually, we say xylene is not miscible with water. It is not clear water like normal water, but it is water that is mixed with alcohol. Okay, so if you have water that is mixed with alcohol and you add it to the xylene, it will make it cloudy. So instead of achieving translucency and clearing of the tissue, it becomes bled, milky, colored, whitish, and so you are not able to see the details of the section. Okay, so you have to make sure that there is no water. So if the last alcohol, the last absolute alcohol contains water, then the dehydration is not complete. So you have to add another one or change the alcohol until you see that the copper sulfate does not change to blue. If it change to a tinge of blue, there is water in it. So you have to use fresh absolute alcohol. Are you clear?
Yes, please. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
I'm okay.
Great. Any more? Any more?
Hello, Madam Cecilia.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so please, when you do that test and you find out that the tissue is not well dehydrated, you start all over again.
No, you just go into absolute alcohol. You go to absolute alcohol. Unless if you have embedded the tissue, before you notice that there is water, so the tissue becomes fluffy or it becomes soft, and then you suspect that there is water in it, then you have to remove the wax by putting water that may be in it. Okay, because if you don't dehydrate completely and then it is able to overcome the xylene and it doesn't show cloudiness because the quantity of the water is small, you will see it after embedding. You see that the tissue, you cut the tissue and it is soft and it can't produce the ribbons that you need. And so you have to go back and de-wax, remove the wax, and then go back to the dehydrating solution. Are you okay? But if you are able to notice it, that is why you have to test. So that is one of the routine things that needs to be done. Okay, so the routine things. So every day you have to put anhydrous copper sulfate in the last absolute alcohol. Okay, so if you put it in and there is water, you change it before you even start your processing. So if there is no water in it, then you can maintain it. But if there is water, if it turns blue, you change it. Any more?
Yeah, Madam.
Yes,
Madam
yes.
Cecilia.
Yes,
Please,
yes.
as we all know that we are all preparing for our licensure examination. From the beginning that we start with handling, please, maybe I would like to know that maybe the likely question that they may ask us from where you started, from where you've gotten to, so that at least as we are getting to understand tissue processing, at least we should also psych our mind that there's a task ahead of us. Thank you.
Okay. So there are several questions that can be asked from physician to where we have gotten to, because they can ask you the stages in tissue processing. They can even, like the protocol, they can give a protocol and then ask whether which one is the right way, mix them up. Okay, they can ask you, they can give you dehydrating agents and give you some chemicals, a mixed alcohol. So whenever they ask which of these are dehydrating agents, it's only alcohol ones that you take, okay? And then they can also give you some agents, like we can give you methods. So they say these methods are used for decalcification, and then you'll be able to select which one is not and which one is, okay? Then they can give you some factors that affect tissue processing. So they can give you some let's say %, so you choose the minimum one, okay? Are you okay?
Yes, I'm getting.
So these are the possible questions, okay? So they will ask you which of these reagents can be used for declaring agent. Then they can put some alcohol, they will put xylene, they will put other things that you should be able to tell that it is xylene. This. So with the any more questions? The people who ask the question, are you okay with the questions that can be asked?
Yes, please, madam. But because today at Lynch we are combined. It's a combo class. So maybe as you are giving us the likely question, at least maybe if it's for MLS or MLSD as our previous lecturers have been doing, I think it will also help us so that we can start our mind.
Well, the questions for MLSD is different from the questions for.
Yes, please. They are different.
How different? How different are they? I haven't seen any of the questions. I don't know the format.
We are different because we have diploma graduates and we have the MLS and the MLSD on the same group. So
Latif, I'll be grateful if you can get some, maybe Pascobi for me to have a look at how the question. I don't know how I know they are objective.
Yes, they are objective, but they are set different because we are different group of.
So how different are they? Are they not from the same thing?
Madam, they are different in the sense that they are set in increasing difficulty. Let me put it that way. So the diploma may be a bit of some basics, and then as you go to the MLS, MLSD, you can see clearly that the MLSD questions are more difficult and require much more complex thinking and technicalities more than the diploma.
That is why I'm taking my time to explain. You see, I'm taking my time to explain so that those who are doing MLSD, they will be able to understand the phenomenon. So anyhow their questions are put, they should be able to answer. So for the diploma people, it will be straightforward questions. Okay, but for the MLSD, it will be put in a scenario form, in a case study that you need to analyze. Okay, that's why I'm taking my time to explain everything and giving you examples using fish and other things to explain to you. Okay, so in any way that they put it, you should be able to understand. So I don't expect that the MLSD, they will put it straight, even though it might be the same answer, but they will put it in such a way that you will have to think before. So they will put it in a scenario form.
Okay, madam.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, we're okay, madam.
So it may be the same answers, Okay, it may be the same question, but the way they will put the question for the diploma will be straightforward. So let's say they will say, list the factors that affect tissue processing in the, or these factors affect tissue processing, except. So that is for the diploma. But in MLSD, they will say that you are given a tissue to process, okay? And then you process the tissue. At the end of the day, what will influence the effectiveness of the processing or will enhance complete processing? Do you get what I'm saying? But it is the same question, but in different forms, different ways. Are you okay?
Yeah, we are okay, madam.
Yeah, so that one, that as you are saying, it will make you think more. So that's why I'm taking my time to explain. Otherwise, I could have just mentioned the steps. When it comes to tissue processing, this is tissue processing, dehydration, this is. So I won't bother myself to explain, but I will explain so that you'll be able to understand. So anyhow the question is put or whatever you are doing, you'll be able to answer. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, madam.
Yeah. Any more questions before we end? Any more questions, please?
Yeah, madam, please. Automated tissue processing. You made mention about the types, which to be the tissue transfer and the fluid transfer.
Yes.
But I need a clarification. You also made mention of the carousel type processor. So this processor, is it
the carousel is for the tissue transfer, and then the self-contained fluid exchange is for the fluid transfer.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions?
No, madam, there is no more questions.
There is no more questions, so we can end the class. Okay, so we'll end and then we would continue next week. Latif, is he there? Next week, I have a class from 2 to 4 on Thursday. Do we meet on Thursday next week? I think we are meeting on Thursday next week. Please, are we meeting on Thursday next week?
Madam, please, I'm checking for you.
Okay.
Yes, madam, we are meeting.
We are meeting.
4 to 6.
4 to 6. Yes, I have another class from 2 to 4. So it means that yours will delay a bit. Okay. So I may not start yours at 4 o'clock, maybe 4:35.
Okay.
So if it's 4:30, then it means that we are going to do 2 hours. That will be 6:30. If it is 5, then you are going to do 2 hours. That is 7.
Okay, madam.
Okay. All right. So I hope that next week you would come to the. If you have any questions, if you have you have any questions, any clarification, please don't hesitate to ask. If I know, I will let you know. If I don't know, I will also go and find out. Okay.
Okay, sure.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.